In this video, I'm going to be walking you through my entire year of 8th grade history lesson plans. It's US history. Before we do, my name is Brooke, and this is That New Teacher, where we inspire, encourage, and empower you to be the best teacher you can be. This video is a video I wish I could find when I was a new teacher. This was my first year in this content area of teaching history, and so I wanted to find how long do I spend on each topic? What ton of topics do I need to cover? What's the pacing look like? What's the testing look like? And I couldn't find it. So I'm going to make what I wish I had as a new teacher. So if that's what you're looking for, stick around. So I teach 3 courses. I teach all of the 6th, 7th, and 8th grade history courses at my school. So on the first couple days of school, I'm gonna start out the exact same way in all my classes, and I just kind of rotate through what that looks like for each year. So I do the same thing for all my classes, but then each year I rotate through what I'm gonna do. So I'm on my 4th year of teaching, so I'll be able to have a few different intro things that I'm gonna be able to rotate through. That's just how I do it, so I don't have to think about 3 different preps every single day for the first week of school. All right, the very first week of school for us as teachers is in-service week, lots of meetings, lots of briefings, lunches together, stuff like that. Unfortunately for me, I was in quarantine because I was down, and that lasted into the first week of school, which made my first week of school this year not land the way that I had wanted it to. I had a sub for the first 3 days of school. We start with no school Monday, Tuesday, and then have school Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Again, I only teach the same thing for all 3 of my courses the first year, so the first couple days. So I just wrote one thing right here for what I had planned to do. It's not what actually happened, but what I had planned to do was rotate different fun ways of doing the seating before I assigned the seating. I was gonna do it by height, by birthday, stuff like that. And I go through expectations as the expectations are needed. So on the first day, I'm gonna have them do an about me assignment, and I'm gonna tell them where do they turn in their work? Where do they get supplies if they don't have them? What do I expect if you finish your assignment early? I'm gonna give them only the information that they need to do the assignment that is given that day. Then the next day, I'm gonna have them do a get to know you bingo where they like sign off, find a friend who read a book this summer or something like that, and they sign it off. So I'm gonna give them expectations for moving about the classroom. Again, where to find supplies if you don't need it, if you don't have them. And then that's gonna be the day that I go over my syllabus. My syllabus is very bare bones. It's very much, this is what I expect of you, this is what you're expected to bring, and this is how I grade. And that's all that's on my syllabus. It's not a lot. And then the 3rd day of school and the end of our first week, I was going to do a digital stations activity where they went through different slide stations, and we're going to do a syllabus scavenger hunt, sign up for some of the programs that I use like Flipgrid, and do a student survey, an about you survey, right? So that was going to be my first week of school. Didn't look like that at all. When we came back to school the next week, that's when I'm going to jump into content. So we're going to look at assigned seating. We're going to talk about respect while I'm teaching and while you're learning, and respect. I'm really big about respecting our room, respecting each other. The first thing I set them off to do for California content, we start off in early America and end in Reconstruction era. The textbook that we use, the curriculum that we use at my school is Bob Jones University, the American Republic. This is only half of it. But this is my first half, and this is the activity manual that goes with it. Use the word activity loosely. It's more like reviews and primary resource analysis. And so I'm gonna scatter these things in for about twice a week, and then we're gonna use the textbook every single day to read and take notes. You might hear a lot of history teachers say like, throw out the textbook, they're worthless, blah, 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 it's boring, students don't wanna learn that way. And they are not wrong. But it was my first time in this content area, and I was teaching 3 different courses. I'm studying like a maniac, all these different things to learn and grow and know what I need to know to teach the kids. I need the curriculum as a guide, and so I leaned heavily on the curriculum this year, and next year I'll hopefully add more and more things that are my own or from other resources. But you know what? I needed to lead on the curriculum as a guide because it's my first time going through. Something I did not know, I thought that I had to teach my entire textbook. And like I said, this is only half of my textbook. I have a whole nother book of this. And I thought that if I had been given this book by my school, that I needed to teach the whole book because that must be what the standards are for this state. I did not read the standards for myself until like after Christmas break, okay? I found out that I could finish after just this one book because the rest of it is dedicated to high school level content standards. So the beginning of my year is going to be structured very differently next year. I'm going to spend a lot more time going more in depth into some of these things and not just like pushing through to try to get through the content, because I was in shock as to how much I thought I had to cover for US history, and turns out I don't. So my first tip to you, make sure you check your standards and see what parts of your textbook you actually don't need to cover or are optional or enriching, right? So we started off with the first day they came back for the first full week of school, we did a why, we study history lesson, and I said I was going to do an investigate the teacher. I was still feeling very ill, and I did not do that. So we kind of looked at textbooks, who had what they needed, who got it from the sub, who didn't. Next year, I'm going to look at doing like a Be Internet Awesome type of thing where we can learn about how to be good digital citizens. So that's one thing I do use my planner for. I make notes for myself for next year. Hey, look at this, do this, try to change this. The Tuesday that week, we started to look at Native Americans, and we started our textbook reading, but we also watched a PBS video on Native America. It's, I don't know what it's titled, but it looks like if I were to give like Native American groups a trailer, like a highlight reel, that's what it would look like. I thought it was really powerful. I liked it. Students were able to pick the Native American tribe that they wanted to study, and then they took that information and had to synthesize it out into just like a 10 like bullet points of facts you learned about these Native American tribes. I feel like our curriculum doesn't spend enough time on that piece of our history, so I wanted to enrich that. I just made it up and was like, hey, go pick a Native American tribe and do some research, right? So that was the assignment for that. And we kind of leaned on doing that for a little bit. And then we went into colonization. Our book goes pretty quickly into colonization. On the Friday, we did our first quiz. So we got our first quiz. I give quizzes every Friday. All my quizzes are open note, but we're going to have a quiz every single Friday to see if we're still getting the information. I do not grade notes. That's how I grade notes. I figure if you have good notes, and I don't try to trick them. Like the answers are in the notes. Sometimes you might have to use some critical thinking, but everything you need will be in the notes for your quizzes. And that's going to be every single Friday for your entire school year. We finished up chapter 1 already. Like I said, it's a very, very short chapter on Native Americans. So we did a quiz on that. That was like actually supposed to be a test, and I didn't really know what I was looking at, and I just gave it to them. Like, it was from the curriculum. I won't be giving that next year. It was not helpful. Then I introduced CNN 10. I don't use CNN 10 as an assignment or anything like that. I just use it as a little 10-minute warm-up. We usually play it at the beginning of class, maybe once or twice, maybe once a week or every other week. But it's just to get them realizing how we're living history all the time. And so that's kind of what I want them to get from CNN 10. I don't need a write-up. I don't need anything. I just ask them to not be talking. And if they are not paying attention, I just tell them to make it look like they are. All right, then we started, what does this mean? Mayflower video. Oh, I found these videos. I think this was also from PBS on their site, their website. There were a couple of videos about what it would be like to be on the Mayflower and land at Plymouth. So I showed those. I don't know if I'll be able to find them again, but that was that. And then my book has these little section quizzes. I started the school year doing those, and then I found out that they were all cheating. So not everyone cheats. Many students were cheating. So I stopped giving those. They're like section review things. I won't tell you how they cheated so that I don't release the information on the internet. But they were cheating, so I stopped doing that. All right, then we get into the New England, spend a day. So then we get to the colonies. If we're looking at colonization, the first day is like intro to colonization. The next one is going to be a day on New England colonies. Then I just spent a day on the middle colonies, a day on the southern colonies, break it up like that. My students really struggled differentiating. Even through the end of that unit, they still didn't grasp like which colony were the bread colonies and things like that. So I'm going to find a way to make that come alive more. I saw somebody do like an artifact walk where they put different sections of their classroom, and they didn't use real artifacts. They were like a shovel or a rake or something to show agriculture and things like that. So I think I'm gonna try to do that and do like a gallery walk or something to try to be like, this section of the room was New England. Remember that? Remember what that looked like? This section of the room was the middle colonies. I don't know. That's what I think I'm gonna do different next year. And then I did a 13 colonies chart where they were supposed to like outline that, but that didn't make it stick for them. So I'm probably gonna cancel that next year. And then we did a quiz on Friday and a math assignment. They did end up having to, on their test, name all the colonies on a map. It was a struggle, actually. So we'll find a way to make that also retained better next year. I don't know if it was like them 8th graders waking up to like, we're back in school. I don't know. But I gotta figure out a way to make colonization come alive next year. Never thought I'd say those words. So we did a chapter 2 review and then a chapter 2 test. And we went on to, I made the mistake of at the beginning of the school year only writing down page numbers that we were covering. And then as I went on later in the school year, I realized it's very important to my future self to write what topic that was so I can have a frame of reference of what I'm talking about, because I don't know what's on page 37. All right, so on page 37. So next we spent a day on talking about the colonies expanding and the different types of people groups that were migrating to these colonies. So we've got the English, we've got the Germans, the Scots, Irish, Dutch, Swedes, and then we talk about the Africans. And this would be the part where we briefly introduce the Middle Passage and transatlantic slave trade. I pulled a primary source from Olaudah Equino, and then there's somewhere online, I just found it. I don't have it packaged in a deal anywhere. It's not mine to give. But I found online there is an audio of somebody reading his primary source. So I had the students read along with that, listen to that, and break down the primary source. This was a new skill for them. Nobody before them had taught my students much on primary source documents. It seemed like that had been a little discarded. So it was work. But it was really good. Let's see, I wrote it down. The primary source was called, it was at americanhistory.si, and it was called On the Water. Okay, and then our book briefly hits the transatlantic slave trade, and then we circle back around to it as we walk through U.S. history. So after spending about 2 days on the African people and their migration to the United States through the Middle Passage, we spend a day talking about the economy in each of the different colonies, New England, middle colonies, and southern colonies. And next year, I think if I do that artifact walk or gallery walk, I'll be able to reference back to that. And I think that will help them understand a little more about who was using plantations for their major economy and different things like that. The next day, we spent a day talking about the Native Americans and their relationships with the English and different types of conflicts that arose from that relationship. I also used Crash Course, the Natives and the English video, and I actually showed most of that video. Crash Course videos are great for me to review content. For middle schoolers, it can be, he talks really fast. So the content is great and it's there, but he talks really fast and I don't see that my students can watch a whole Crash Course. The next day, we reviewed some vocab and I prepared them for the fact that they were gonna have to take notes on their own. At this point, all of their notes had been on the screen, but I knew I was gonna have a sub coming up for 3 days and that they would have to take notes on their own. So I kind of equipped them with skills for that. And then the next days they moved through, basically when I have a sub, I try to make it so that the kids can do all the work themselves. If there was no one to show up, like they could still function and do well. So they're gonna read, they're gonna take notes, and they're gonna have one assignment in the activity manual to go with that. So they started a new chapter, Daily Life in the Colonies. So the first day would be about the social classes, and then the second day was about family life, and then the third day is going to be about education. So they went through those 3 things while I was gone. We came back, we reviewed what they learned, and then I did a simulation on the Salem witch trials. It's really simple. I don't want to give away the secret because my students will watch and then they'll know the answer. But I'll tell you anyway. If you're my student and you watch this, don't you dare ruin it for next year, okay? Okay. All right. So what I do for the Salem witch trial simulation is I tell them their grade is 100% dependent on how many people they have in their group, like what percentage of the people in their group at the end of the the simulation are witches. I'm going to walk around, you're going to put your head down, I'm going to tap you on your back, and you will be a witch. And your job is to try to get yourself into the group. If you can't get yourself into a group and you're a witch, then you fail. That's pretty much what I told them. And they were already ready to scream and riot in the streets about this grading system. So I tell them that's happening. We set, I think it was like a 5-minute timer. So you gotta set a 5-minute timer. You gotta be in groups. Remember, the bigger the group, then you have like a larger percentage chance of getting a better percent. But then like also you could have more people in the group that weren't supposed to be in there. The trick is at the very end, they're all in their groups and none of them were tapped on the back. None of them are witches. And that is supposed to help them understand what it was like to be falsely accused, as many people were in this time period, in this time of panic. I said, do you feel like the emotions that you felt when you were trying to convince somebody that this wasn't true about you or something like that? So that is how I do the Salem Witch Trial simulation, and they all get 10 points for participating. So there. And then we had a quiz and CNN 10 that Friday. All right, so then we get to, it looked like they didn't cover fully education, so I must have went back and covered that again. And then we talked about religion in the colonies. That's going to be about the Great Awakening. That's leading into the Great Awakening. We spent a day on the Great Awakening. It might need more. It was kind of a lot that day. I said they have homework extra credit. Oh, we did CNN 10 and an activity. We did CNN 10 and a booklet. That's almost always a cue that the test is coming the next day, because that's pretty much my strategy. If we have a test the day before that, we're going to watch CNN 10 to breathe for a second, and then we're going to play booklet and see what we know and how we're doing. I make all the booklets myself, GIM kits, quizzes, Kahoots. I feel like they help my students get a tool in their toolbox to help them study. Do I want them to have other study skills? Absolutely, which is why I still give a study guide and not all of the questions are on the Kahoot or the booklet, because you got to learn to be a historian. All right, chapter 4 test, life in the colonies, and on to the French and Indian War. It looks like we spent 2 days on the French and Indian War, which is going to be about like conflict over policies and opposition from the colonists. And then I saw that we were going to have a whole bunch of acts, and I did them in stations. One of the tricks that I do is that I will literally take the textbook and turn it into a Canva. Like I'll put it on Canva and type it up and make it look pretty and like add some pictures. And the students don't realize they're reading the textbook, but they're doing it in stations and they're just reading the textbook. If you're watching this, don't spoil it for your friends, okay? I give them this like fill in the blank sheet so they can get their notes in like a fill in the blank format. So they have to go to the different stations and learn what they need to learn and find the information for their fill in the blank notes. And they feel like they're doing a fun activity and they're reading the textbook. Tricked you good. But it's just a different way of presenting the same information. And I think sometimes we just got to change it up. So I did the different stations for all the different acts that day. Townsend acts, intolerable, no, those are all a whole bunch of different. I did the Townsend acts, the Tea acts, the Boston Port acts and quartering acts, the Quebec act. There are more like later that I grouped them all together and then did them all on that day. Then I went back a little bit in the textbook and did the course of the war. We talked about the Battle of Quebec. And then apparently I did the stations. I moved it. I didn't do that. A lot of things must have gone wrong this week because I wrote the act stations again. So I must have actually done them that day. And then I said I was going to do the breakup letter. It kind of went viral on TikTok for a while where you read the breakup letter. I even bought it on Teachers Pay Teachers, but I never did it for whatever reason. A lot of question marks going on here. Not sure what I did. And then we took a quiz and we talked about the Continental Congress. If you know me, I'm a little bit of a Hamilton fan, like the musical. I like the musical Hamilton. So I tried to find ways to integrate it. Same way, my same strategy that I always have for integrating movies and films and documentaries. I don't always show the thing as a whole. Hamilton as a whole would not fly at my school in 8th grade. Not gonna happen. So I selected certain songs that fit with what we were learning. And I either showed the song in its entirety because it was appropriate, or I knew exactly when I needed to pause it and fast forward it and skip. For instance, when Hercules Mulligan sings during one of the songs, like he doesn't. You got to be muted for that part, buddy. Like we don't talk like that in school. Okay, So that's how I strategically use Hamilton. I don't show the film in its entirety, not even close, but just a couple select songs to like back up what we're doing. And then the kids who are into it, and some of the kids who are not into it are like secretly into it. They're like, oh, I didn't realize it was like, that's kind of good. Okay. So one of the times where this fits in perfectly is when we talk about the first Continental Congress, and we talk about the Minutemen and Paul Revere and the shot heard around the world. So I show the farmer refuted there, and then the next day I'm going to show the story of us, episode 1, and I show, it says number 16, from 16 minutes to the end of the film. And then that's what I'm talking about, where I like very strategically insert pieces. And the way that I know how to do that is over the summer before I taught history, I watched all of America, the Story of Us, and all of the Mankind Story of Us documentaries. And then I literally put in what parts I wanted to use and where in my content that it was going to land. And that involved me watching them all and flipping through my index to find where that topic was being covered if I liked that bit. And if I don't like that bit of it, it doesn't make it into my notes and I don't use it. All right, so then it looks like we talked about the Continental Congress. That's probably the second one, I'm gonna guess. The second Continental Congress, because I wrote it twice. Either that or we got behind again. And then I started this activity called for Crown or Colony, or Colony or Crown. And it's an online role-playing type game that the kids can play. And they take on the role of an apprentice during this time period, and they kind of get to make decisions whether or not they're going to be a loyalist or a patriot. And it's a really cool, I really like the game. There's a whole lesson that you can download for free for Crown or Colony. It's from Mission US is the website, totally free. And then my students are one-to-one Chromebooks, so we can do it in class. I had to like get the headphones from the office so that they could play the game, but and on their own. And so then we'd play for a little bit today, and I would tell them where they had to stop in the story if they got this far, and then they had to do certain assignments that went with that. So we did that for 2 days, and then I think we took a break, if I remember right. No, we just went through it. We did some review. That's what we were doing. We were reviewing what they had learned and then playing the game, watching CNN 10, playing the game. They were supposed to be studying for tests, for homework. We went over the study guide and played Blicket. And then they had their first unit test, which was a big deal for them. It was 5 chapters of a test of everything we had learned. And then we finished the game on Friday. So it takes a lot of amount of time. It was stressing me out that it was taking that much time, but the kids really loved it and remembered it. And it helped them understand the difference between a loyalist and a patriot, and what it would be like if you weren't really sure which way, like you saw the appeal in both. It really put you in the position of how the colonists might have been feeling at the time. They also have many other role-playing games that go with different topics throughout history, so check it out. Big fan. I failed. Here's the second Continental Congress, and I must have lost my mind because I lost my notes. So we'll skip what we did that week, and then I did it again. I planned one day and then lost my mind. So it looks like we watched the Story of Us for about 15 minutes, episode 2. And then we were talking about Saratoga. So I'm a few pages further here. If I did not take notes, I probably just went through the book and was like lecturing and taking notes and lecturing in PowerPoint slides. And that was what we did, man. I'm sure that's what we did. There are a few periods where I went blank. Then we went on what was apparently a much needed Thanksgiving break. And we came back and talked about winning independence, which covers like the Battle of Yorktown, things like that. And then we got into articles and achievements, the articles being the Articles of Confederation, and why was that a good thing or a bad thing? Like, what were the advantages to the Articles of Confederation? And then what were the weaknesses? We spent a day on the weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation. And then we talked about how they were building the Constitution. And again, going to analyze the weaknesses and advantages of that. Quiz on Friday, as always. When we came back on Monday, we discussed what the successes of the Constitution are, and then we went on to looking at study guides. It looked like they were about to have another test. Oh, you know what they were about to have is their final, their midterm. All right, so I talked about history fair. That's huge for 8th grade and 6th grade. At our school, they have history fair. I will make a whole nother video about history fair because it's just too much to talk about. But just know that history fair is going on in the background for the first like 3 months of January, February, March is all history fair stuff going on in the background on top of the content that we were covering. So I'm going to intro the history fair. They were going to pick their topics. Oh, choose topics. And I said we were going to do a history of a Christmas assignment. Didn't do it. I don't know why. Choosing topics took longer than I expected, I think. And then we did a crossword review and grudge ball. And then the next week they were going to come back in finals. And then 2 weeks off for holiday break. That brings us to January, and the first day back, I did a review of procedures and routines. I did it like a slideshow, like I would never do on the actual first day of school, but now we have a relationship with each other, like we've gotten to know each other. So now we're going to talk about our procedures and routines in like the slideshow format, and I gave them a pop quiz, which made them crazy, but they were supposed to do good. I was supposed to give them an A for the first day of school back. It's just stuff like, where do you find a pencil when you need it? What do you do if you have a question? Like, where do you go for absent work? I also knew I had a few new students coming in, so I wanted to make sure to get that information to them without singling them out and being like, you don't know what we do around here, right? Then we enter the unit that talks about our titles are Growth of a Nation, Jacksonian America, Changing American Life, and Westward Expansion. That's what the next unit is going to be about. First, we talked about triumphs and expansion. So I crammed a lot in here. This is about the conquering of the Barbary pirates, the Louisiana Purchase, and the Pike Expedition. I plugged all that into a day. That was a lot. And then we did the War of 1812. This was still before I realized that I didn't have to cover my whole textbook. So I went in, coming back from Christmas break, thinking like, I'm going to have to run through this material. So you're going to see that coming up next. Then we did the War of 1812. And that was 3 days for the War of 1812. We took a quiz on it. And then we went into the era of good feelings next. Oh, looks like we did some group work on an assignment. Sometimes just making a regular assignment, a group work assignment, makes it exciting. So that's probably what I was doing. And then we entered the era of good feelings. Middle schoolers have lots to say about that. Then we go into Jackson and the spoils system and things like that. So that's what we talked about here for a day. Then I spent a day on like tariffs and things like that, the things that were upsetting people at that time. So that's why it's called internal controversy. It was a lot of content in a day. I was plowing through. So the Webster-Hayne debate, Calhoun and Jackson clashing, the Compromise of 1833, so much. The National Bank, Jackson and his pet banks, the Specie Circular. All of that I did in a day. Don't recommend doing that. We all wanted to cry, me and the students. And then I do have part that I showed about the Trail of Tears. I think I'm going to move that back to when I'm talking about Tecumseh. The book doesn't fit that very well in, so I got to find the right spot for that. But from the story of us, there's a bit, like a 3-minute bit about the Trail of Tears that I do like. As it appears, I didn't finish that content about internal controversies, and I pushed it there again. And then we did a matching review thing. And then we talked about the legacy of Jackson. Then I showed a bit about Daniel Boone because our book has like a sidebar about Daniel Boone. And so it was like a nice breather away from politics because I'm not passionate about the political system of the United States. I love U.S. history, but when we get like deep into the politics and legislation, I get really like weary. So we hopped on a little Daniel Boone sidebar and watched some of the men who built the frontier. A bit of that. And we talked about transportation and communication, which is things I actually like. And then we talked about waterways like canals for a day. So we're talking about like the Erie Canal. And I showed part of the episode, 3 of the Story of Us that talks about steamboats. It looks like it didn't finish all that and moved some of that to Monday. And then, so again, like a lot of this was going to be me thinking I had to do more than I did. And just trying to cram it all in there and then pushing it out. And then at some point I figure out I don't have to do that anymore and I breathe easy. We're going to talk about transportation and communication. We're going to talk about developing industry for a day. And then we're going to talk about agriculture and trade for a day. We're getting into like the Industrial Revolution in America. And then immigration and religion for a day. And then when we talk about the Industrial Revolution, there comes up the social reforms that occurred outside of that, like labor unions and workers' unions and things like that. So that we talk about for a day the different reform movements that occurred. And that's a good day that we get to highlight women because a lot of times women were the leader of these reform movements. What did we do that day? Chapter 11 review. So it looks like we're reviewing back what we learned. I did a Freyer model vocab. I got on a little kick at one point in the year doing Freyer model in all my class for vocab. If you don't know what that is, you can look it up. It's just another way to look at and review vocab for students. CNN template and a chapter 11 test. I almost never get a test on a Friday. That's surprising to me because a lot of times kids are absent. They like to make a 3-day weekend when there is no 3-day weekend. Okay, we are at February 7th. And now we're gonna open up our Westward Expansion chapter and how that looked for us. So Westward Expansion, the first part is like, why? Why would people move out of their little colony town? Well, I guess it's not a colony anymore, we're independent. But why would they move out of that safe town, or what felt safe to them and known to them? Why would they move all the way across the country and uproot their family and move them out there? What was the allure of the West? So we spent a day on that, like why? Why would we move west? What were the reasons why? Who were the early trailblazers? Then we go into the trails of the West. So we talk specifically about the Santa Fe Trail. Then we talk about Texas. Our book like jumps to Texas and does the whole Lone Star Republic section, like battle for the land in Texas. So we cover that for a day. And then I did an Oregon Trail activity. I left a note for myself that said it was perfectly timed, very engaging, do this every year, happy face. So I like to leave notes for myself like that. This was one I found for free online somewhere. It was an Oregon Trail PowerPoint, and it walked through as a class, and the students were like keeping track of their points of how they did. And so we went to all of the major, it's kind of like playing Oregon Trail, but as a class simulation instead of playing it online on the computer. So you went to all of the major like landmarks that you might hit, and the students had to make a decision, and they picked A, B, or C, or D, and then I'd flip the slide and it would tell them what points they got for A, B, C, or D, and why that thing was a bad choice or a good choice. So that was a lot of fun, and I just found it looking up Oregon Trail simulations online, and I found it for free. So then the next day following that activity, we're going to spend a day talking about the trail to Oregon and Utah and why people traveled that way and what they did once they got there. Things like, that's also when we do a quick look at Mormonism. Going into the next week, we start talking about mining in California and the California Gold Rush, which my students love because we're in the Bay Area. And then we talk about the 49ers. And so I get to make jokes about the 49ers the whole time. I did a 4-minute bit of episode 3 of the story of us about wagon trains. And then we talked about fighting for the Southwest for a day and Manifest Destiny map study. I always love map studies because I feel like our students don't know like where things are happening in terms of the globe. Then we spent a day talking about sectional rivalry, which includes the Compromise of 1850. And I showed a little bit of video about Lincoln. And then I was hitting a weird like 4-day weekend that we had. So we played Oregon Trail on the computer, and that's available for free online through like the Visit Oregon website. So I had the kids play Oregon Trail on the computer, and they had a little like worksheet they had to fill out about like what supplies they brought and what job they chose. Then we're spending a week reviewing. We're going over, this is a whole unit, another big unit test. So we spent a lot of time reviewing. We're also talking about history fair because that's coming up for my students. They're having a study hall, they're having review time. So we're gonna do that. And then they came back and had their unit test on Tuesday. We had CNN 10 and a review game, always the day before a test. Then we picked up the Civil War. My Civil War unit, I stretched out. This was when I figured out that I didn't have to do all of the things I thought I had to do. So we lived in the Civil War for a really long time. All right, so we picked up the Civil War and we started out with the North versus the South. What were the advantages and disadvantages of each? What did life look like in the North and the South at this time period? Spent a day on that, and also looked a little bit at the relationship between cotton and slavery. And then we spent a day on slavery in antebellum America, and we took an open note quiz. And I made a note for myself that slavery in antebellum America took 2 days. So next year I probably won't make the Civil War and the events leading up to the Civil War take as long, but this was when I figured out that I didn't have as much to cover as I thought I did, so I could breathe. So we went really slow, and you know what, that's okay. My students were also working on their history fair in the background, so anytime we had extra time in class, it would just be like, all right, it's time to work on your paper, it's time to do some research. So there was stuff going on, it just wasn't necessarily this content anymore. So after doing 2 days, what it says will be 2 days on slavery in antebellum America, then we talk about issues intensifying. That is things like, these were the things that were creating emotional responses to the people in the nation as things led up to war. So we got the Fugitive Slave Act, books like Uncle Tom's Cabin, the Kansas-Nebraska Act, And then that leads us to the next day where we talk about Dred Scott decision and John Brown. I put those together in a day. Oh, and the Sumner Brooks episode was in that day too. And then we talk about the election of 1860 and how that looked and how it turned out. And we spend a day on the election of 1860. And then the next day I had them really working on their essay. So we just did a short primary source document about Frederick Douglass's escape from slavery. The students found that really interesting, and it was a good analysis moment. And we had no school that Friday. So we're breathing easy. We're getting our way to, my students had their rough draft due for their history fair that following Monday. And then we're talking about the Union versus the Confederacy. What did the Union have that the South didn't have? We did this analysis thing that I found it on Teachers Pay Teachers, but I don't know for who from. But this comparison assignment where they had to say who had advantages in the North, what advantages did they have in the South, who do you think was best set up to win this war? And then the next day we talked about modern warfare and the type of weaponry and tactics that were used during the Civil War and how the older tactics from the American Revolution were not very helpful during the Civil War. We spent a whole day on the first Battle of Bull Run. I think it's like 4 paragraphs in our book, but we talked about that for a long time. It's entertaining to think about people hopping up on a hill and watching war like it was a sporting event, and then being very disappointed when the outcome didn't happen as seamlessly and easily as they thought it would. So we spent a whole day on the first Battle of Bull Run. We had a quiz, and then we talked about the second Battle of Bull Run the next day. I did a task card activity that I bought on Teachers Pay Teachers. It's called the Who's Who task cards. I bought it on Teachers Pay Teachers. The students went around the room and had to find out the different things about some of the major league people in the Civil War. That task card activity took a whole period and then some. Not all my students were able to finish in a whole class period, so I left them up taped all over my walls. And then the next day I let some students, I like opened with some study hall time and let the students go back around and find what they didn't get and let other students work on their essays and stuff like that. And then we did a comparison between Lincoln and Davis and talked about controlling the river waters during the war. The next day we did an activity called the Civil War Battle Stations. This was also for free. I think I had to sign up for somebody's newsletter, but I found it online for free by signing up for their newsletter. And it was a very good activity. I highly recommend it. They go to each station, and each station is a Civil War battle, and they have information that they have to fill out about it, about casualties and major events that happened during that battle. It was really useful and left a good organized note section for my students on Civil War battles. And then we talked a little more about some other battles that we didn't cover that day and kind of reviewed some of the stuff we did cover. It was kind of like a brief intro to the battles, and then we're going to go back around and look at it the way the textbook wanted us to. We had a quiz because we had no school that Friday. After we came back from spring break, then we had the history fair. Their papers were due. They had boards. They had presentations all week. And now my dog wants to go inside. So the week of the history fair presentations, that's pretty much all we do. The first day, I let them work on their final drafts, and their boards were due. They're all bringing in a whole bunch of stuff into my classroom. My classroom has projects everywhere. It's quite the day. So we don't do a lot that day. And then Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, we do presentations. And then the 5th day, we did a whole day on the Battle of Chancellorsville. Again, not a lot of content, but I was taking it easy at this point. Then on Monday, we spent a whole day on the Battle of Gettysburg. Now I have visited the Gettysburg battlefield, so now I'll have even more content to give them, like pictures and video from when we were there. But we go over the battles of Gettysburg, and then we read the Gettysburg Address and do an analysis of that. So that was all one day. Then Tuesday, we're setting up for the history fair evening event. Kids are taking over their boards during my class period and setting them up in the auditorium, and then that night, the parents are all going to come look at their projects. So we got to spend time in class time setting that up. So at this point in the year, it is now April, and we're going to start wrapping up our Civil War. And then there's a section in our book called Waging Total War, which is about the Emancipation Proclamation. It's about the Shenandoah Valley. It's about the march, Sherman's March to the Sea, all those kinds of things, and about how the war affected all the people, not just the soldiers. I left a note that for myself that was long and boring. So I got to find a way to make it not so boring next year. And then we've got Ending the War, and I had a video about interviews. Oh, that was about emancipated slaves. I don't know if I showed it. I did show it in class. It was an interview. It was voices, the radio interviews of slaves who had been emancipated. It was really interesting. All right, and then we ended our week, of course, with a quiz. It was good that we had wrapped up the Civil War because the next week for us is going to be a week of state testing, followed by a week of spring break. After we came back for spring break, I knew my 8th graders were gonna be gone, but we still had to, gone mentally, okay? But we still had to push through and learn Reconstruction. I just wanted to give them the briefest overview of Reconstruction that they could because I knew there wasn't a lot left in their mental capacity to participate in school, and I knew I was not in a place to make the content creative and interesting, so we were just gonna be like, I was like, hey, we're both on the same team here, we're gonna get through Reconstruction, and then we're gonna go to Washington, D.C., okay? Okay. So we talked about what is Reconstruction for a day, and I started a video on Vanderbilt that we didn't finish. I hate doing that. I wrote notes to myself about not doing that video next year. We talked about what is presidential Reconstruction, what did that look like, what was that phase. We spent one day on that. We spent one day on radical Reconstruction, and then we spent one day on the Bourbon Reconstruction, and that was really, oh, and then recovery and what that looked like. What I dislike about the state standards for California is that that is where the story ends. And I think the way that the standards are written, they're hoping that the story reads, the slaves were free and we all lived happily ever after. So I didn't like the way that the story ended there with Reconstruction. We definitely did not all live happily ever after, and I didn't want to leave on a downer like that. So I ended up fast forwarding history a little bit and jumping to the civil rights movement and just doing like a mini unit on the civil rights movement. So we spent one day doing civil rights since the Civil War, taking notes on that. And then I did an activity called the Civil Rights Road Trip, which is kind of inspired by the Freedom Riders. It's from Students of History. That's where I took this whole unit from. I didn't use my textbook for this unit. Then we took our day 2 notes and did an assignment on the March on Washington. Then we were working on our study guides. This was a time where I said we were gonna do 1-pagers and didn't end up doing it. We took a quiz, we're reviewing, and then this is the 8th graders' last week of school. They finished school a week earlier than everybody else, so we were reviewing. I split their final into 2 different days. They also had a beach day thrown in there. It was a wild week. So like I said, they were not, like they were checked out early when we were in Reconstruction. But that's pretty much how my 8th grade US history ended. It was very lecture heavy. Knowing now what I know about my content, my favorite engaging activity was probably that Mission US. The kids really remembered it and connected with it. I would love to hear if you guys have some tips to make US history a little more engaging next year. It was a lot of politics, a lot of note taking, and I would love to change it up a little bit next year and make it a little more project based. I know for my Native American section unit, I'm gonna go deeper into that and have students do models of Native American dwellings. That's an idea I have going on for US history next year. If you stuck around this long, you are hungry to become a better teacher. So thank you for stopping by, and I will see you in the next video. And I'm gonna go take a nap.